My name is Monique White. I'm the Executive and Advocacy Manager at Solve, and I am really excited to be here with you all today. All right, so let's talk about what the best practices are during your meeting. So when you are talking with either one of your members of Congress or their staffers, you want to keep in mind the context that they're coming from. So just imagine their day is really fast-paced. They're having a lot of meetings that are back-to-back 5 to 15-minute meetings where they're just having to check in with people really quickly. They're needing to absorb a lot of information really quickly. And they're really listening in these conversations for what specific action steps they need to take to follow up. And just really trying to figure out like how they can best do their job and how they can be really effective with the time that they have. So one thing that's really, really helpful is you want to be really, really honest, but you also want to be a bright spot in their day. You want to be someone that they remember as like, oh, I really want to help that person. I really want to help that group. So being positive is really important, leaving them with that feeling of hope, leaving them with that feeling that they can do something to make a difference is really, really important. Another element is to practice active listening. And so one of the ways that becomes really important during these types of meetings is you have to remember that we're going in with an agenda from our end, right? We have things we want to communicate to our congressional members and their staff, but they also have an agenda from their end that they're needing to follow through on. They have things that they are listening for, and they're going to have ideas, they're going to have comments, they're going to have thoughts on the best ways we can go about addressing the issues that we're bringing to them, and they may want to get our feedback on that. So practicing active listening allows us to be able to pivot if we need to. It allows us to be responsive to what our members of Congress or their staffers are saying to us, and it allows us to get a lot of really good insight into who our potential allies are going to be and in what way they might be able to be our allies. Because sometimes what we find is we may find allies in really unexpected places, and they may have unexpected solutions. And so we always want to hear what those might be and kind of make sure to take a note of that so that we're able to follow up afterwards. Which leads me to my next point. And sorry, I just realized I am, as usual, speaking way too fast. So I'm going to slow down a little bit. So the next piece is to take notes. One thing that can be helpful is making sure that you have a designated person on your team who is going to especially be paying attention to taking notes. But it can also be helpful for each person to take notes, and especially just keeping an eye out. You don't know what you might get a note on that someone else might miss. And between everyone on the team, we'll be able to make sure we get all the information. That helps us a lot when we are then following up. So it allows us to ensure that when we follow up with our members of Congress, we know exactly what we're following up on. We know what was discussed in those meetings, and we're able to make sure that we are appropriately following up and not kind of repeating information or sending them thoughts that they've already said no to. Amy, I am seeing your question in the chat saying, I'm guessing the answer is no, but is it appropriate to record our meetings with our delegation? Unfortunately, we're not able to record the meetings with our delegation. Part of that is just because we want to be sure that they feel free to be as honest as possible and not feel like they're in kind of a gotcha situation or something that's going to like be posted publicly afterwards. We want to make sure the staffers feel really, really safe in the meeting, because they then feel able to open up to us a little bit more and to really engage in the conversation. Okay, so the next section is to ask questions. We want to approach our meetings with a sense of curiosity. And sorry, you can see the sun is currently setting here in Texas through the blinds on the window. So we want to make sure that we are curious, that we always want to seek to understand where our members are coming from. We want to understand what kind of approaches they think will be best to address the issues that we're bringing to them. And we really want to kind of be thought partners with them. You know, we don't want this to be a one-way conversation. We want it to be something where we're saying to them, this is really, really important to this huge group of people that we're here representing, and you can help. Do you have thoughts on our proposal? So questions are really important, especially really specific and focused questions that build on anything that your members or their staffers say. Okay, so how do we practically do some of these things? So one of the first pieces is to correct with kindness. Um, the staffers and the members of Congress are going to have different levels of familiarity with ME/CFS, with long COVID, with the other infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses. And so sometimes they're going to use terminology that's not what our community would prefer. Sometimes they're going to say things in ways that, you know, might get our hackles up a little bit, and we're like, no, that's not right. You know, that's not how we approach it. That's okay. We just want to make sure to kind of take an educational approach, and we can say, actually, as a community, we prefer the term, and then just let them know which term we prefer. So that can be one gentle way that we can redirect if they're saying things in the way that we wouldn't prefer. Another way that we can really be sure to engage deeply in these meetings is to make eye contact. So in this case, I know it can be hard when we're both trying to take notes and engage in the conversation, but looking directly at the camera will really give them that sense of, okay, I am directly interacting with this person. So as much as possible, looking directly at the camera can be helpful. I like to take notes on my computer during meetings, so that way I'm looking at my screen anyway, and just kind of typing in the background. So that can be one way that's helpful, but if you're taking notes on paper, that also works. Just make sure you're looking up and down, and kind of, you know, engaging in that natural flow of conversation. All right, next piece. We play by Jeopardy rules. One thing that can be really helpful is to state our asks in the form of a question. So we're not trying to tell them, like, you have to do this. This is the only way to do this thing. We're right, you're wrong. We really want it to be something where we are engaging them and saying, here's something that we think could work. What are your thoughts? So it's really information gathering and just a two-way conversation about the topics we're addressing with them. Okay, another piece, and this is for those of you who are like me and get a little anxious when you are on the spot. Oh, I'm seeing a request to soften my background. I'm gonna just turn on blur. Okay, so keep in mind, you don't have to have all the answers. We are bringing them a big issue to address, right? This is not something small. This is something that millions of people are dealing with all over the country. And so it's a complex issue, and they don't expect us to be coming to them with all of the answers. We are there to advocate on behalf of our communities, and we're there to let them know that this is something that matters. So just know that if you get nervous, it's completely okay to not have all the answers and to just say, I am here because this is something that I have personally been struggling a lot with, and it's really, really important to me, and I need your help. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the ways that you can say that. The next piece is, if you lose your place, you'll want to refer to your handout. So over the next couple of weeks, you'll actually be receiving a participant toolkit that will have our ask in it. It will have the talking points written out. It will have a breakdown of some of the topics we're going to cover today in terms of what to expect in your meetings. So you're going to have these trainings and instructions in multiple different ways. We'll have it written out, we'll have it over video, and you'll also have your Advocacy Associates web portal that we'll talk about here over the next couple of weeks, which will have instructions there as well. So we're going to make sure you have all the support you need to be able to refer to the information you need as you go. Next slide. Okay, so next, let's actually dive into what to expect. The first thing is that every single meeting is important. And I know it can feel like there are so many members, there are so many people in the house. How can I make a difference just talking to one of them? The answer is that we never know which one of them could potentially be a huge ally for us. These are really long-term relationships that we are building. We want to get to know these staffers, especially because staffers tend to stick around. They may be in one office this year. We may see them again in another office next year in a completely different role. And you never know when someone is going to be in a position to make a difference, to help advocate for us from the inside, or to really be able to follow through on something in the future that they possibly aren't able to act on right now. So we have to remember that the staffer is essential in the life of an office. Be prepared to talk with a 25-year-old who could very well be making policy decisions for the office. They're hugely important to the process because the members of Congress are not necessarily all able to pay attention to everything that comes through their office all the time. So the staffers are the ones who actually filter for them and say, this thing is what is important. These are different topics we need to address. I'm seeing some questions coming through. Jill, the meetings are more than us telling our stories. Are there any videos of or examples of role playing in a meeting? Emily, I may actually throw that question to you. Do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. We can reserve some time at the end to maybe role play a bit and show you what that looks like, and kind of how that matches with your storytelling. So it's your storytelling that we practiced in our previous training, plus adding your talking points. So we can show you what that looks like at the end of the call.
Perfect. Okay. So another piece to keep in mind is Congress is in session right now. It's a very controversial time during the congressional year right now. They're in the middle of appropriations. They are allocating funding. They are really diving down into the details of where money is going and figuring out what they can do for each different community. And everyone has different priorities. So we just need to keep in mind that the member of Congress themselves might not be available, specifically because they're in such a busy time of the year, but that their staffers are super, super amazing people to talk to, and frequently have a lot more in-depth knowledge about health policy than the member may have, which is why they're in these advisory positions and in these positions of actually taking the meetings with us. Okay, so the next piece is if you're speaking with a member, you're going to give them the key points, and then you're going to follow up with staff if needed. So we just want to keep it really, really simple to begin with. And Jill, I am seeing you there in the chat, and we will definitely dive in more depth about just exactly what we're asking for and what that looks like next week, when we talk about what our asks are. The next piece is don't be surprised if the meeting starts late, ends early, or if the time gets moved. This I know can be really, really frustrating for those of us who have energy limiting disabilities. So I know sometimes I need those couple of hours in the morning to try to get myself ready for my Zoom meetings, right? So you're kind of trying to store up that energy. You're trying to make sure that you've got your spoons and you kind of have yourself in that state of anticipation. Just give yourself a little bit of buffer time on these meetings. Know that frequently, because the staffers are going to be coming from back-to-back meetings, they may need time to run from one side of the building to the other. Their Zoom meetings before us may run late. They may have an unexpected vote that they all get called in to deal with. So it's not anything intentional or personal if they show up late. They are absolutely going to do the best they can to make it to all their meetings on time. But if they don't, we just want to have that grace and be okay with us, be okay with just kind of going with the flow. Next slide. Oh, and Jill, I do see your question. If a meeting runs late, then could that make us late to our next meeting? So we have actually asked advocacy associates as much as possible to try to avoid putting people into back-to-back meetings. So we try to have a little bit of buffer. That's not always possible, especially if there's like two representatives within the same state who want to have their meetings like right next to each other. But as much as possible, we do try to leave a minimum of 30 minutes between meetings. All right, so let's move on to the three B's. They are be brief, be brilliant, and be done. So let's kind of break this down a little bit more. Members and staff run their days in 15-minute increments. So you don't know who they've been meeting with beforehand. It may have been on a completely different topic, and they're having to now shift gears. They're having to put themselves in the mindset of, okay, which group am I meeting with now? What do I need to focus on? What is important right now? So it's really important for us to make their job as easy as possible so they can help us. So be brief. The first piece of that is just about getting to the point. We don't want to waffle. We don't necessarily want to take too much time introducing ourselves, especially at the beginning. We really want to be able to just have the team lead kick things off and just say, hi, this is who we are. This is why we're here. And this is what we're hoping to get out of this meeting. There will be time in some of the meetings for people to share in more depth. But we do recommend figuring out like a 30-second version of your story that really highlights the main points that you want to communicate, just in case the staffer is moving fast that day and you don't get a lot of time to share your story. Sometimes you will get a little more time to share, and that's amazing when they are really able to take the time and listen in depth. But being brief is a huge part of just being able to communicate our message in the time we have. The next piece is to be brilliant. This is really just about communicating how important this is to you, the amount of passion you have for this issue, the amount of weight that it carries in your life, and just being able to let them know that you need them to follow up on this, that you need them to help with this, because this is an issue that is so important to so many people. So really just communicating that, like allowing them to see your heart, allowing them to see on a human level the impact that this has will really shine through. Emily, anything to add on that point?
I think that covers it really well. One thing I would add is when you consider that the staffers are often referring to their notes and writing up a summary for the member at the end of the day. So when you give those little soundbite talking points, you can kind of pause or rest and just be like, or lead in with, we talked about bridging in our previous training. You can lead in with a sentence like, this point is really important because, and then emphasize that, so they'll, oh, that's the one I need to write down, and know that they will be referring back to those notes later. So giving them note friendly talking points is very helpful.
Absolutely. All right. And part of that is just getting right to the main points. We're like, here's point A, here's point B, here's point C. Don't get bogged down with the details. There are so many different policy mechanisms and levers that we can use to get to where we want to go as a community. There are so many different ways to get from point A to point B. But we don't necessarily want to kind of dive into like the specifics of, okay, this is exactly where we're going to pull this money from, and this is where we're going to get this piece, and this is the office we're going to do this in. We really want to focus on the big picture. This year especially, we're approaching Advocacy Week from a very educational perspective. We just want to make sure that all of our members of Congress know where our community is at, what we're hoping for. We want to make sure they know that as the community of infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses, we're actually all working together in coalition because we recognize that our illnesses have so much in common, that we are sharing similar experiences with the healthcare system, that we're sharing similar experiences when we're trying to get a diagnosis or we don't have an ICD code for the symptoms that we're experiencing. that we're sharing the same comorbidities, that there's so much overlap between all of the different things we're experiencing. And in particular, that as a community, we are all sharing in this need for multi-systemic research across different government departments, across different organizations. We need that research to be happening between different structures in the body, not just focused on one different part of the body at a time. And so these are areas where our illnesses and conditions have so much in common that we are now fighting together to get funding, to get an office or an entity or an institute that can address that and coordinate that. So stick to the big picture, because we are just there to let them know how important it is to us as a community, and that we're here and that this is something that we're all fighting for together. Next slide. Okay, here is a fun one. Be nice. There is nothing that tired staffers hate more than angry or rude constituents. We want to remember that we're building long-term relationships. There are going to be so many times, and I'm sure you've all experienced this too. You get halfway through your day, you've been on back-to-back Zoom meetings, you haven't had time for lunch, and you're exhausted. And it's hard to sit there and smile at Zoom meetings sometimes when you're already so worn out, but it's not personal. It's nothing to do with the person on the other end of the Zoom call. You're not mad at them, but you just have resting Zoom face because you've been on Zooms back to back all day. So I think the biggest thing here is just to make sure to give them the benefit of the doubt. These staffers are working really, really hard. They're working long hours. And they're doing the best they can for the most number of people that they can. And sometimes they're going to be tired when they hop on the call, and that's okay. So just remember that your meeting is just one of a series of interactions we're going to be having with them. We're sending them information beforehand so that they are prepared for these meetings. Hopefully they have time to read them. They may not. We're having the meetings, and then we're also going to be following up afterwards. So if a member can't help us now, they may be able to help us in the future. Political winds shift quickly, and we don't necessarily know when an opportunity will open up where the member or their staffers will think, hey, I met with that group a few months ago. What were their names? Oh yeah, that's right. And reach back out to us and say, hey, you mentioned this plan you had. Can we talk more about it? So just know that even if they seem icy at first, even if they seem like they're kind of like interrogating or grilling us or just being really, really direct and pointed in their questions, they're just trying to gather the information they need so that they are able to help us if they can. And so giving them the benefit of the doubt that they want to help us and that they're doing the best they can is hugely important, and will go a really long way to ensuring that the meetings help to build those long-term relationships. Next slide. Okay, so just a few really practical tips. The first one is to stick to your schedule. Don't miss a scheduled meeting. And I know that this is particularly hard for our community sometimes because it's so unpredictable when we're going to wake up in the morning and be like, oh, okay, I am completely flaring. I can't do anything today. We completely understand that. The organization that helps us with our scheduling also completely understands that. What we ask is communication. So no call, no shows reflect very poorly on the organization and the cause, especially if the person from the meeting who is the constituent of that senator or of that member of the House of Representatives doesn't show up. And they're like, okay, well, why am I meeting with you if there's not even anyone from my region or state here? So just letting us know beforehand, no matter how much warning you get, because I know sometimes you do flare up at the very last minute or even in between meetings, just send us a quick email, send us a quick text. We will make sure that you have the ability to connect with us as quickly as possible and as easily as possible. And just know that there will never be any judgment if you just need to say, hey, I'm flaring up. I can't make it to my next meeting. Just any heads up you can give us so that we can notify the members of Congress that there's been a change is so, so appreciated and valued. And yeah, it makes a huge, huge difference in those relationships. All right. The next piece is cancellations or running late. So we will provide the advocacy associates phone number so that you can call them directly with any problems. They are the ones who directly handle the scheduling for us and who are directly in communication with the congressional offices. And typically the offices are very accommodating if given notice. Do not try to reschedule the meeting on your own. Notify advocacy associates of whatever has come up. So sometimes this will even happen in terms of you get to the meeting with your staffer and they're not there. You know, sometimes they show up late or they don't show up and you're like, what's going on? That is a great time to reach out to Raquel and advocacy associates and just let us know, hey, like we've been here for 5 minutes. Our staffer hasn't shown up. Can we make sure that the link is correct? Can we double check that everything's going okay here? But don't try to reschedule it on your own because we've got hundreds of meetings happening on any given day, and it makes it much more complicated if there are multiple people trying to reschedule. So that's why we go through one specific organization and point of contact for them so that we can keep everything really simple and streamlined. Offices do remember bad scheduling experiences. I have previously worked as a scheduler on the campaign side of the world, and they really, really do remember it when people no call, no show. So that is why we are so emphatic about it, because typically if they get a no call, no show, it makes them much less willing to take a meeting in the future. So with all of that in mind, I want to finish this slide by just saying, please know, like, I have long COVID. Emily is a caregiver. Her mom has ME/CFS. So we are so familiar with how it feels when, you know, and the feeling of guilt and of letting people down that comes with when we do flare up at the last minute. But just know we always understand, but communicate as much as possible. All right.
And I'll
Next.
also mention that that's why we never schedule you alone. You will always have a group of minimum 3, maximum 15. So there's other people there too. So again, just as long as you let us know and we can say so-and-so can't make the meeting, we can get coverage, just let us know and we can solve it. And that's why we set up our meetings the way we do because we understand exactly when those bad days happen, there's just no controlling it and we just work around it. So let us know and we will.
All right. Okay, so continuing on with the meeting tips, the next piece is to stay on message. So typically your team lead will guide the conversation with their opening. If you happen to be the person opening your meeting, you'll want to introduce yourself and your story, share your personal experiences, and emphasize the real world impacts on healthcare and on the constituents in the district or state. This will really grab the attention of your member or staffer to listen right from the beginning, and it will set the tone for the conversation. One thing we really want to avoid doing is going off on tangents, because it just makes it really hard to figure out, like, why are we here? What are we trying to do during this really limited time we have? And I know that as a community, there are so many things that we need and so many things that we want to fight for. We want to be able to go into these meetings and speak with one unified voice during Advocacy Week, because that is how we not only communicate to the congressional members that this is something where our community is in unison and this is something where our community is all fighting together, but it also ensures that when they then go follow up with their colleagues after these meetings, they're all getting the same message and they're able to connect and have the same information. And it makes it a lot easier for them to then collaborate on helping us after the meetings. Emily, anything to add on that piece?
No, I think that really covers it. I think this year is unique because we're talking about IACCs more broadly. So in previous years, we'd say stay to ME/CFS or stay to ME/CFS long COVID. But this year, it's okay to talk about your other diagnoses. And so this is a unique year in the sense that that's not going off message this year. So if you want to talk about how your ME/CFS led to a autoimmune disease, maybe Sjogren's or something, or your endometriosis also came along with your ME/CFS, or you had a pre-existing autoimmune condition and then you had COVID and now you have long COVID. Whatever that history is, this is the year you can really open up about that reality of the multi-syndrome existence. So I'd say this year, this is especially a year that you can really develop and dive into that broad sense of how we all experience a real syndrome soup of conditions with these illnesses, and they never seem to travel alone. They always seem to travel in packs. So that's kind of the message that we're trying to really deliver, and that's a really powerful message this year.
Absolutely. Okay, so my final point on this one is the importance of speaking plainly. One of the most important things we can do is make things really tangible and practical and focused on the real world consequences that these illnesses are having on people just trying to live our lives, right? So you have to imagine that the staffers are sitting there. A lot of the time, they're having to look at things from a bird's eye view. They're looking at economic papers, they're reading research studies, they're reading news articles. But what they may be missing is that personal communication about what the day-to-day experience is. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, the next piece is not to assume. We don't want to assume that staff know too much or too little about the topic that we want to discuss. So just know that your story really is the most compelling reason for Congress to follow up on helping our community. And you are the expert on your personal story. So they may be the experts on the economics, they may be the experts on the policy side of things, but your story is something that only you can share. Your story is something that is important and holds a lot of wisdom and strength, and you should share it boldly. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to move through a sample meeting outline. Next slide. Okay, so virtual meeting protocols. You'll arrive on time, which in this case will be early, so that you can meet your team. You will introduce yourselves. You'll identify who the constituents and group leads are within your group. So the constituents are the people who belong to the district or the state of that representative. And the group leads, you're going to each have a group lead assigned for each meeting. And typically that's going to be an experienced advocate who has done this before and is going to be comfortable and able to help guide the meeting and make sure it stays on track. So the role of the group lead is going to be to identify these are the people on the group. They're going to ensure that the staffer has the links that they need or the information that they need. And then we're going to wait for the staffer to respond and address the group. So we will also, from our end, be sending thank you notes and follow-ups to these meetings. So just know that with all the information and notes that you provide us, we will be following up and sending thank yous. Next slide. Okay, so if you are one of the group leads, you'll need to arrive 10 minutes early. This is partially just to make sure that the Zoom link is working, that everyone is able to show up and gather together and prepare. You'll start the meeting and make introductions, and then you will state the one sentence tagline of this is why we're here, and we will make sure you have that written down and all ready to go in your materials. You'll identify who in the meeting is the constituent, so the staffer knows, okay, this is a meeting I have to pay attention to because it is something that is impacting people in my in my area of responsibility, right? The group lead is also going to help everyone find an opportunity to speak and help with the time management. So don't be surprised if your group lead kind of has to send you a little personal Zoom chat saying, hey, we need to move on to the next person. Or if they sometimes do need to cut in and just say, okay, let's move on to the next person so that they can keep things running on time. Finally, the group lead will do the wrap up and the thank you, both to staff and fellow participants. Next slide. Okay, so this is kind of going to be what the timing might look like. So this is just sort of an example. Introductions typically will take about 5 to 7 minutes total. It may be around 1 minute per person, sometimes less if you are in one of the states that we have more representatives from. So the group lead will begin the meeting when the congressional office joins the call. We'll invite the congressional representatives to introduce themselves. And then once they're done, we'll invite each of the advocates to briefly introduce themselves. So a sample opening might be, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for meeting with our group today as part of the Solve ME Advocacy Week. We'd like to share some of our experiences to show why we are supporting creating an entity or like a coordinating mechanism at the NIH for infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses. Shall we start with introductions? You always want to include your full name, the city and state you're from, and your connection to ME/CFS, long COVID, or another infection-associated chronic illness. Next slide. Next, we'll then move on to storytelling. Now, depending on how long the staffer or member has available, this may be 10 to 15 minutes total. Keep in mind that sometimes staffers are only going to have 15 minutes total. Typically, they'll try to let you know at the start how much time they have allocated, but just know that this may be shorter. So the group lead will call upon each person one at a time to share their thoughts and experiences. The group lead may remind storytellers of time limitations if necessary, and the group lead should also have an opportunity to speak. And we're going to be updating the tagline and providing that to you, but you'll have a personal storytelling worksheet, you'll have training videos available to you, and we'll make sure that you have all the materials you need to practice getting your story set up and know that you're really confident going in with it. We also have coordination calls happening each Wednesday leading up to Advocacy Week, which is an opportunity to write your story and practice it with each other so that you have that chance to really fine-tune it before you get there. Next slide. Okay, finally, you're going to have questions and repeat the request. Typically, the group lead is going to conclude this piece by answering questions from the members of Congress, repeating our tagline, and sharing contact information. So we will have, typically for the House and Senate, we'll have members that you're going to reach out to, or members that you're going to be able to let them to reach out to. So let them know. Yep, that's the one. It's getting late in the evening. And so this will just be telling your members of Congress, please contact this person for more information and to get involved. And a couple of questions your group lead may ask include, what is the best way for us to follow up on these requests? Or when should we reach out for an update? I am seeing these questions in the chat and we are going to leave time for them at the end. Next slide.
Oh, that's actually the last slide. We are at the end.
Excellent. Okay, in that case, Emily, do you want to kind of take us through some of the questions you've been seeing coming through on the chat?
Absolutely. I'm going to stop share so I can see everybody there. Hi, everyone. So yes, we've had a lot of questions in the chat. Excellent conversation. I think we've given you kind of a sense of what your meeting will be and how you'll go through. So at this point, we're going to turn off. Oh, actually, no, we wanted to do a role play. Sorry, I apologize. I almost forgot we were going to do a role play. So Monique, would you like to pretend to be our staffer today? And I will be the role play person. So this will be an example of, I'll do two parts. I will do, the first part will be an example of me as a group lead doing the introduction. And then the second part will be me as a storyteller sharing my story. So the introduction is much shorter. So we want to keep the introduction to about a minute. So that would be your the first part, and then the second part, your story, would be about 3 to 5 minutes. And hello, I see folks coming off camera. It's so great to see you all. Welcome, welcome. So I'll begin the first part now. Hi, my name is Emily Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Engagement for Solve ME, and I'm here representing my organization and also my mother, who was diagnosed with ME/CFS in 2012 after becoming sick in 2008. And I just want to point out that time frame difference because the average ME/CFS patient takes a minimum of 4 years to even get diagnosed. So that's 4 years of treatments that we're not getting to people.
Hi, Emily. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here today. My name is Monique. I am the health policy staffer with Ted Cruz's office, and I am interested in hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. So as I said, my mother has this illness and she's been sick since 2008. She, like many, many other patients out there, started by getting a virus. We never found out the virus that she became sick with, but she struck 104-degree fever. And after that, went to bed for a few weeks. A few weeks became a few years, and those years became most of her life. She's been sick since 2008, as I said, and one of the biggest challenges with this illness is there is no cure and there is no FDA approved treatment. Any treatment my mother had to try was off label. And as a result of that, she was unable to get a lot of the available treatments without, unfortunately, misrepresenting herself on her medical records, which is what she did. This is actually one of the reasons why medical records are incredibly difficult for this population and need to be handled extra carefully. But that's actually why I want to talk to you about this common area of interest with other infection-associated common illnesses. That's an example of one of many issues we all have in common. Infection-associated chronic illnesses and conditions can include long COVID. It can include myalgic encephalomyelitis, like my mother has. It can include mast cell activation syndrome. It can include POTS and other forms of dysautonomias. There are millions of patients out there with these infection-associated diseases that are not being treated because they're underfunded, and the NIH is not looking at these diseases appropriately. In fact, all of the studies take place across 23 different institutes and agencies, whereas in other areas, there's one-stop shop with one institute that actually controls the areas of research. So what we're asking for is an entity at the NIH to coordinate and synthesize all of the research around all of these diseases so that we can find answers and treatments for people like my mom sooner.
Wow, okay. That's really interesting, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your story. So what is it that you think that our office can do for you?
Well, we're so glad you asked. Please review the white paper that we've included in your packet. It outlines our position incredibly clearly. It's really worth a read, and I hope that your boss, your Senator Cruz, will be able to look at it as well. And if these policy solutions are of interest to your office, there's contact information in your packet for the appropriate senator to reach out to, so that Senator Cruz can get involved.
Okay, that is super helpful. Is there anything else that I should know when I'm talking to my boss?
Absolutely. I'd like you to really emphasize that infection-associated chronic conditions and illnesses are not new. They've been around for decades. We've had 40 years of research on ME/CFS alone, and researching these diseases like we've never seen them before just slows down the process of finding cures and finding treatments for millions of Americans who suffer from them.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Monique.